They call him Britain's most dangerous man, a murderer beyond the prison walls and within them, the inspiration for Hannibal Lecter's glass cage. Entombed in silence, a genius mind rotting in its own brilliance and despair, he has begged them to kill him, but his punishment is life. On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're telling the story of Robert Maudsley, a man too violent for even the system built to contain him. Robert Maudsley, once nicknamed a brain eater and a cannibal by the British tabloids, has been detained at His Majesty's pleasure for around 50 years, making him Britain's longest-serving prisoner. 46 of those years have been in solitary confinement surrounded by guards, which has come at a great cost to the British people. But the system says he is an animal, a monster. They say they can't risk him getting close to other inmates. He's now 72, an old man, but he is still treated like no other prisoner on the planet. Just recently, they made his life much worse. But let's go back to the beginning. Robert wasn't born with a silver spoon, far from it. He came into a world of poverty. The fourth child among 11 other siblings, his working-class parents from the tough streets of Liverpool couldn't cope. So Robert and his siblings, Kevin, Paul, and Brenda, were placed in the care of the state, sent to a home for orphans. This was the 1950s, when abuse in homes for abandoned poor kids ran rampant throughout the whole of Britain. Nazareth House, run by nuns, was where Robert and his siblings spent the first years of their lives. Decades later, a government report would describe children there enduring physical beatings and punishments on an almost daily basis. But that wasn't what happened at Nazareth to Robert and his siblings. They were so young when they went there, they learned to treat the nuns like their mothers. There were the occasional beatings at Nazareth House, but nothing compared to what awaited Robert when his parents took the children back home when he was 8. Their style of parenting was barbaric. He brought out the leather belt and his wooden stick. Robert's brother later said it was a team sport. Their mother instigated the beatings with words, and their father made them physical. Out of all the children, Robert got it the worst. "All I remember of my childhood is the beatings," he once said. He talked about the time his dad locked him in a room for 6 months, only opening the door to throw food in, and beat him 4 or 6 times a day. He was once hit over the head with an air rifle, snapping it in half, quite possibly injuring his brain. This was the first taste of solitary confinement. Closed spaces would terrify him for the rest of his life. He couldn't understand what he had done to make them hate him so much. He'd missed the nuns, but his only reprieve was being removed from his home by social services. After that, Robert was passed from one foster home to another, where he endured more abuse. It was as if predators could sense the victim in him. "Where's Robert?" the other kids asked when he was gone. "Dead," growled his father. For years, they believed him. Robert was truly on his own, a life bereft of love and protection. At 16, he became one of England's many lost children to run away and try to make a life on the streets of London. There were other teens like him, drinking and taking drugs. Addicted and hopeless, Robert ended up in psychiatric hospitals, where he told doctors that he could hear voices in his head telling him to kill his mom and dad. By the time he was 20, Robert was desperate. To feed his drug habit, he became a rent boy, offering his services to men he met in London's many pubs and nightclubs. And that's how he met John Farrell, a laborer who paid Robert for sex in some public toilets. When Farrell was finished, he showed Robert photographs, grotesque images capturing his own depravity. He thought it was funny. Robert was incensed. He snapped. These victims of violence were just like him. In a cubicle, his teeth clenched, he garroted Farrell with a necktie, watching the blood drain from his face. He didn't feel remorse. This was payback. He was quickly arrested, but it was soon evident that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. They sent him to Broadmoor, a psychiatric hospital for the criminally insane, where over the years, some of Britain's most twisted and violent prisoners have called home. There, Robert's nickname was Blue, the color his victim's face had turned when he was strangling him. Things started well. Robert was treated with drugs and given therapy. He seemed to improve, but after 3 years in 1977, the rage inside of him boiled over once more. He still hated men who hurt children, and in Broadmoor there were many of them, most themselves victims of abuse. But Robert wasn't thinking about how trauma begets trauma and violence breeds violence. He was thinking about revenge. He and another patient, a psychopath, David Cheeseman, planned to kill a predator named David Francis. Robert and Francis had been playing five-a-side soccer, and Cheeseman was cheering from the sides when they lured Francis into the room where the soccer gear was stored. They had barricaded the door while nurses and security frantically tried to force their way in. Inside, Francis was soon screaming for his life. He thought he had befriended Robert. Months earlier, they had both kidnapped a prisoner together, but Robert was just biding his time. When the nurses looked through the small window in the door, Robert was beating Francis, smashing his head against the wall. Cheeseman went up to the window, smiling, making a sign with his finger to the staff that Francis was going to die. Cheeseman was a true psycho. He thought the whole thing was funny. Robert wasn't like that. He had a sense of right and wrong, even if it was warped. He didn't tick many of the boxes on the psychopath checklist. He just wanted blood. 3 years earlier, he had warned the judge, "Send me to Broadmoor and I will seriously hurt someone." Now he was keeping his word. The next thing the staff heard was a gurgling sound and feet drumming on the floor like the victim was in his death throes. 9 hours later, Robert and Cheeseman calmly held up the dead body to the window. It was all over. They had opened the door and they calmly walked outside. When the staff walked into the room, Francis was lying in a pool of his own blood. A security guard would testify that Francis's head had been, quote, cracked open like a boiled egg. Both Robert and Cheeseman told the police that they had planned the murder, going so far as to arrange the furniture in the storeroom 3 days earlier so they could more easily barricade the door. The initial plan was to electrocute Francis with wires from a coin-operated football game, but instead, they garroted him with a wire. It was quick and handy, they said. In court, handcuffed, surrounded by police officers, Robert was articulate as usual, almost threatening the judge. He would pay dearly for that defiance in the years to come. He reminded the judge of his warning, that this would happen if the Mental Health Act was used against him. He looked into the judge's eyes and coolly stated that if a similar indictment was handed down to him, he would soon be back in the dock for another violent crime. His final words shocked the court. "This statement is not a threat, my lord. It is a statement of future fact." This threat, made to a man holding one of the highest offices in the land, has rarely, if ever, been mentioned in the countless media articles written about Robert. He had threatened the state, carried out his threat, and then threatened it again, an act that must have infuriated the established order. And as you'll see later, he would make good on that second promise too. While Robert was clearly mentally unhinged, he was convicted of manslaughter and sent to Wakefield Prison, a high-security Victorian-era hellhole in West Yorkshire. Inmates have nicknamed it Monster Mansion due to the high number of very dangerous men, many of them having committed horrific acts of sexual violence. The move reminded Robert of the days of his childhood, when he was bounced from one foster home to another. Years later, he had talked about the abuse that he suffered in some of those houses, admitting it might explain why he turned his rage on men who preyed on others. Now he was housed for life with those men, and again he sought revenge. He'd been there for less than a year when he calmly walked into the small office at the end of the landing. He told the guards that they would be a couple of inmates short for the evening's roll call. He had just killed again. There were 7 abusers on his wing that he had gotten to know, 7 men he planned to murder on the same day. His first victim, Solney Darwood, a wife killer he called into his cell for a chat. Robert had planned this well. When Darwood entered the cell, Robert lunged at him with a homemade knife, stabbing him repeatedly until he was dead. He put Darwood's body under the bed and started calling out to other prisoners, asking if anyone would like to have a chat. Unsurprisingly, no one took him up on this offer. They could sense something was wrong. Wakefield was filled with extremely violent men, and Robert wasn't particularly big or muscular, but as a prisoner later said, he had murder in his eyes. With no one taking the bait, he walked out onto the landing with his knife concealed. He stopped at the cell of a man convicted of hurting children, William Roberts. Minutes later, Roberts' head was being smashed against the wall, his skull hacked at with a knife. Men were now hiding in their cells, running the other way, parting like the Red Sea when Robert walked past them to the office and placed his bloodied knife on the table. It seemed almost too crazy to be true, but sure enough, 2 men lie dead in their cells. Robert was sent to the solitary confinement block. 1 hour a day in the yard, not much contact with others. And that was when he met one of Britain's most violent prisoners, the infamous bare-knuckle brawler Charles Bronson, who later changed his name to Charles Arthur Salvador after taking up art. Bronson would cover himself in margarine and fight guards in riot gear. They'd eventually get the best of him and leave him for months in a cell in the pitch-black darkness, shoving food through a hole in the door. After Robert, he is now Britain's longest-serving prisoner, with extra years added for countless offenses, including kidnapping a convicted terrorist, and on another occasion, a staff member, and then demanding ransoms like ice cream, Uzis, cheese sandwiches, and even a helicopter. It was just a joke to him, but it frightened the life out of the prison officers. And in 1978, his new neighbor was Robert. already infamous among British inmates for those murders. They called him Spoons, referring to the spoon he'd used in one of his brutal murders. Bronson himself had once been at Broadmoor. He'd hated every minute of it, men running headfirst into walls, abusers, serial killers. But one look at Robert and he said that's where Robert belonged. He was crazy, smart, but far from stable. "I know about Bob," Bronson said later in an interview. "I've seen him go mad. I know what's happened to him, but we hate each other now." The falling out was over a watch he tried to give to Robert. He felt sorry for him, but Robert declined the offer. Bronson called him ungrateful, to which Robert threatened to stab out his eyes and eat his heart. In most circumstances, this would be an idle threat, but not when Robert Maudsley says it. Robert wasn't yet known to the British public. That all changed in 1982 when the BBC aired a documentary about Wakefield Prison, and his case caught national attention. The truth was, said the show, the authorities didn't know what to do with him. There had actually been signs of progress earlier when Robert was sent to Parkhurst Prison on the Isle of Wight. There, psychiatrist Dr. Bob Johnson believed he had finally gotten through to him, but for reasons the state has never explained, Robert was transferred back to Wakefield. Maybe that judge that he'd once insulted got wind of his progress. Indeed, Robert's brother would later say whenever Robert improved, they would break him. Years later, Dr. Johnson called the decision ridiculous, describing Robert as intelligent, polite, and cultured. Johnson said nearly all children are born lovable, but after he had unpacked Robert's appalling childhood, he wasn't surprised that he had cracked. In the BBC program, it was said that Robert was a bomb that authorities couldn't disarm, the most dangerous prisoner alive. Just after it aired and Robert was the center of media attention, Her Majesty's Prison Service said that they had found a solution to the problem of this man that everyone feared. They were going to build a maximum security unit like nothing else on the earth. It would be a prison within a prison, down in the basement, a special cell just for Robert. And it would one day serve as the inspiration for the cell of Hannibal Lecter in the movie The Silence of the Lambs. Cold, damp, the cell was at the end of a walkway. To reach it, a visitor had to go through 17 locked steel doors. It was like walking through the 9 circles of hell, with Robert right at the end sitting alone on a bed with officers monitoring his every move. The sheer lack of privacy was enough to break him. It was total humiliation. The outer cell was a barred cage. Inside of that cage was a reinforced bulletproof plexiglass tomb where he was under 24-hour surveillance. His furniture was a table and a chair made out of tough cardboard. There was a toilet and a sink bolted to the floor, and his bed was a concrete slab with a thin mattress. Like an animal in a zoo, he would sit alone all day. No books, no TV, no music, no games. The officers were told they weren't to talk to him at all. This was pure isolation. The story of his cell eventually became a thing of legend in Britain. The press would nickname him Hannibal the Cannibal and the Brain Eater, but the tabloids as usual were exaggerating. The public was mixed in its opinion. Some said good riddance to the monsters Robert had killed, but that didn't mean that they wanted him back on the streets. Robert's brother believes it wasn't just about justice or danger, not after many years had passed. He said that it was about psychological damage, payback for Robert taking the law into his own hands. His confinement, he said, was where all the trouble started, meaning when Robert's dad had him locked in a room. The system knew these details, but they still went ahead with the complete isolation. That's where Robert stayed for many years on end without the privileges other prisoners enjoyed. "All I have to look forward to is further mental breakdown," he wrote after about 20 years in his glass cage. He wrote directly to the Times newspaper in the year 2000, pleading to have access to classical music tapes, a TV, pictures, toiletries, and a pet bird. He said that if he couldn't have his bird, then they might as well give him a cyanide capsule, and they'd never have to worry about him being a danger to society again. He seems to have missed the point entirely. He was serving as an example. "I am left to stagnate, vegetate, and to regress," he said. "Left to confront my solitary head-on with people who have eyes but don't see, and who have ears but don't hear, who have mouths but don't speak." He was referring to the rule that officers shouldn't speak to him. If he looked at them, they averted their eyes. It was like he was a ghost, like he didn't exist. They had told him that he couldn't have a pet bird because he would harm it, maybe bite off its head. But he hadn't hurt anyone since those killings years earlier. He'd always explained that he did it because of what those men had done to their victims and to people like him. This was years ago. What about Robert now? He's just beaten the world record for the most time spent in solitary confinement, 46 years. No man or woman on the planet has spent more time locked up in a cell. a cell that costs the British taxpayer about £500,000 a year because of all the security that's needed. The previous record was set by Albert Woodfox. He was caged in a 6-by-9-foot cell in Louisiana's notorious state penitentiary for 43 years after being convicted of a murder he didn't commit, a conviction that was overturned in 2015. When people asked Woodfox what it was like, he would tell them to go sit in a bathroom for 24 hours and then imagine what a week, a month, a year, or 43 years would feel like. Only Robert would understand the madness that Woodfox experienced. A few years ago, he had another request to die turned down by the British government. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, he just wanted to end the pain. "Why even bother to feed me and to give me 1 hour's exercise a day?" he said. "Who actually am I a risk to?" That was the last time he petitioned for assisted death, writing that he felt like he had been buried alive. The request wasn't granted, but around 2015 something changed. They allowed him books, a TV, and the classical music he so dearly loved. They later even gave him a PlayStation. His imprisonment became bearable, but last year he went out to the yard alone, and when he returned, all of his belongings were gone. Again, it was just him and 4 walls. The prison had held an operational exercise after an inmate had earlier tried to smuggle in a firearm, so officers shut down the block and locked everyone down. But after 2 days, while the rest of the inmates were back to normal, Robert remained in lockdown with all of his privileges gone. He asked the head of his section why he was so special, and they accused him of being abusive. He was broken. He couldn't do any more time without any type of stimulation, so he went on a hunger strike, telling his brother it was time he died. But again, they messed with his mind. Instead of returning his items, they moved him to HMP Whitemoor in Cambridgeshire. He was finally out of his glass box, but they just put him in another kind of solitary confinement. He is now on F Wing, a special wing for prisoners with personality disorders. Many of the 70 men who are his new neighbors have been convicted of hurting children. A woman who has written to him for about 5 years said the new arrangement is a disaster waiting to happen. She explained, "He does not want to be alongside other men because of the abuse he suffered as a child." His nephew said Robert now spends 23 hours a day locked in his cell. He has no access to TV or books and barely gets outside to the yard. He's recently filed an appeal, and ironically, he wants to go back to his glass cage in Wakefield, but with his items back. For those last 10 years at the Monster Mansion, his mood had greatly improved. Officers had started talking to him. They played chess with him and had long discussions about life. With books, music, and games, even a telephone, the madness had ended. He is treated with more fear than any prisoner in Britain. One thing is for sure, he is never getting out. He's serving what the British justice system calls a whole life sentence, along with about 70 other prisoners in the country. Most of them serial killers and maniacs who did vile things to women or children, the kind of people Robert killed. Robert Maudsley lived a life of violence, but what about his neighbor at Wakefield? Watch Man So Violent Even Other Prisoners Fear Him to hear Charles Bronson's story, or click on this video instead.